Folks, welcome to Draft Sickos. I am Maxwell Baumbach, and this is the show on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed and YouTube channel where we discuss everybody from the biggest stars to the deepest sleepers. As I said, I'm Maxwell Baumbach, and I'm joined by the real star of the show, Stephen Gillespie. Stephen, how are you doing today?
Well, Maxwell, I appreciate that. I'm doing great, man. It's been a fun weekend. I was just talking to you beforehand, but my wife just got home from a little girls' retreat, so I was on full-time dad duty all weekend. She made it home today. We were all happy to see her. So falling back into the swing of things, man. How about you? How was your weekend?
It was good. It was hectic today, but good. Yesterday, this downtown near us, they have a thing where they set up like robot dinosaurs around the downtown area. So my daughter was going bonkers for that. She was all about the dinosaurs. So we go around or whatever, we eat lunch, and then we're like, all right, like let's go look at the dinosaurs again. And then of course, like the one that you wanted to see a second time was the biggest one, which is also most out of the way. So that was a blast. Got my steps in though. It's a good time. And then today we took advantage of the weather, can be finicky around here. So last day of like for sure good weather. So we went, got some ice cream. And this place, man, there's this place, Dairy Delight. If you're ever in the Aurora, Illinois area, they give you a free slushie while you wait in line. You order your ice cream and they're like, what free slushie do you want? And you just get a free slushie before
What did you get?
Ice cream. So we got a coconut slushie, was the slushie flavor we went with. And then I got an apple pie sundae. So it was like ice cream, apple pie. There was like some caramel syrup in there, more ice cream, more pie. It was fantastic. I feel like I'm going to die. There is like a non-zero chance that during this episode, I might just like keel over. So it's been bad between that. And I ate like 9 million cookies yesterday. Like I got my weight where I wanted to preseason. And then the last 2 days, I've been out of control. Got to get back in line. Yeah, we got No Ceilings. Like this is the preseason. Like we're in like training camp next now. Like official season starts next week. I got to knock this stuff off. I'm worried about my off the court behavior right now.
All these best shape of your life, right?
Yeah, I was until 2 days ago. We got to get that under control. So today's episode, we are covering the G League Ignite. I am fascinated by everything G League Ignite this year. So for those unfamiliar, newer to the draft space, the NBA started this experiment a few years back where they have a team that competes in the G League with a few veterans on it and then a group of draft eligible players. This year, it's another really good crop. I think the difference this year is there are way more prospects on this team than there have ever been. I believe we've got 7 guys that are draft eligible, not including players that are on the team that are still, working towards a future in the NBA that aren't draft eligible yet because of their age. They're still so young. So it is a very interesting situation. It's going to be a very different dynamic this year because it is such a young G League Ignite team. And they've already started to play some games. It's been some ups and some downs, and we're going to get into this group. Before we kind of get into the specific players, what are your thoughts on how the G League Ignite constructed this roster? Because it is different to go with this many prospects on the team.
Well, I don't think that it's so much different that they have this many prospects, Maxwell. To me, I think they went into this roster construction more team focused, if that makes sense. It didn't feel like they went for as many stars as they could possibly get. I think that this roster is probably the most well-rounded that the Ignite have had. And it's interesting, right? Because we've seen guys like Hardy, Kuminga, Green, players like that, players that came in with high reputation, but it was weird just kind of getting them to fit and gel together. And Maxwell, I don't know how you're feeling about it. It's still early, but this season looks like it's going to be probably the most well-rounded roster for the Ignite that we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I think the two things that really help are you have Eric Mika, who can really coordinate the offense as a big man, and you have John Jenkins, who's just a nightmarish shot maker, like one of those guys that you can just be right up on him and he'll still score. So having those two vets, I think, goes a really long way. David Stockton's been fine. Pargo, he's been playing on this team also.
He is a member of the G League Ignite, yes.
So it's an interesting squad, good solid group of vets. But let's get into the prospects, and let's start with Ron Holland. Ron Holland, the guy that is number 1 on ESPN's board currently. I believe Sam Vecini had him around the 2 spot. I have him in the 2 spot. On our kind of initial, we did a very tentative board for our preseason draft guide. Spoiler alert, we got preseason draft guide coming out again.
Maxwell, you can't tell people that we're going to do the same thing that we did last year.
Yeah, don't want to ruin the surprise. Yeah, so Holland was number 2 for me on that. Has he been in a similar place for you?
Yeah, I think so, man. Like when I'm, scrambling around to get these like initial boards and going through and doing the deep dives on Synergy, shout out to the fine folks at Synergy. He easily has to be within your top 3. And I could agree. I can see different takes where you might have certain players ahead or have him even number 1. I've seen a lot of boards now where he has kind of risen to the top. And let me ask you a question real quick, Maxwell, before we get too deep into Ron Holland. What do you think about, like the NBL? And we're going to be talking more about NBL next week. And the Ignite, they started their seasons before college basketball. And I think that some players are standing to benefit a lot by being the only names really in the mainstream right now.
I think it helps a lot. And I think where you really see it is guys will have like solid games that aren't great, and there's just not a ton of noise around it. So it's like, oh man, like this guy had a really big game or whatever. So I think that is where it's kind of sit out the most. Because if the guy like, and I'm not saying this to like disparage him, I think he's a really interesting player and has been really surprising. Ben Henshaw dropped 24 today.
Yeah.
If Ben Henshaw drops 24 in like January, I don't know that it gets the same levels of excitement and attention as him dropping 24 before the college season starts. So,
or at least if he's doing it after we've seen guys like Justin Edwards play,
Yeah. And that's the thing with Ron Holland. And like, we'll talk about Alex Sarr next week too, is like, I'm kind of just keeping Justin Edwards in that 1 spot because that's where I had him prior to the season. And I want to give him that benefit of the doubt. I don't want to move somebody out of the 1 spot without a reason to do it. If that's where my perception of him was coming into the season. And I want to, see if he's made those same strides that guys like Holland and Sarr and Jacoby Walters, another guy in that mix. I want to see where those guys are before I move them down at all. I don't think that would be fair, but yeah. So Ron Holland, I do think has benefited from that a little bit. I think some of the guys further down boards too, like we've just seen, and I think part of it too is we've just had a lot of surprises as far as the international class so far. Like a lot of guys that were not on boards all of a sudden have been like rocketed into the first round. So I do think there is something to playing in a foreign league or a domestic league like Ignite, where you kind of get this head start on the college season. If you're performing, if you're not performing, I don't think it's doing you any favors. So you still got to produce, but so with Ron Holland specifically, what is let's kind of break into his game. Do you want to lead off on Ron, or do you want me to?
Sure. And I came into the season with kind of like a funny feeling about Ron. To me, he doesn't feel, and I'll lead off with this. I don't know if you're drafting him to be your number 1 guy on your board, right?
Agreed.
I don't know if too many teams that necessarily need a number 1 guy anymore. We talk all the time about how deep the NBA is. And, if Washington is drafting number 1, I think they're probably looking for a number 1 guy, because they already got someone who can do a little bit of the things that Ron Holland can do, and a guy like Kyle Kuzma if they don't shop him around, right? So I think Ron Holland makes sense as like a second or third best player on a team, which is why coming into the year, I didn't have him number 1. But he does a lot of things really well that I think can help out a team that already has kind of like an infrastructure put him around him. For starters, Maxwell, he's already got an NBA body. He's very athletic, very twitchy, a very good defensive playmaker. I think that he has smart hands, and he's kind of like a transition starter. Like he gives you extra buckets, those extra points, extra possessions. They're extremely valuable in any basketball league, let alone the NBA. Slides his feet really well. I'm happy when I watch him that it doesn't look like he bites too heavily on pump fakes. Like he positions himself well and has a strong enough foundation on his defensive stance to where he can kind of like do 2 things at once, to where he's ready to defend you. If you're looking to drive him, he's long enough to really get up in your stuff and contest your jumper. A solid shooting motion too on the offensive end, capable of getting into the paint despite not having like an elite wiggle to his game. Like, he has some handle, but he's not like a guy that you're looking to break down the defense and get to the paint on a regular basis. But he does have some moves that he can go to. And I worry about his shooting touch consistently. I think that he's had some pretty erratic misses already in the early going this year. So where his like shot grouping is kind of like too far spread out. And I'm not sure what to think about his passing or playmaking, because right now he's kind of exclusively used as a play finisher. And Maxwell, I know that we've talked about this, but I'm excited to share it here on the pod.
Yeah.
He reminds me so much of young Andrew Wiggins.
I see the same thing. I was gonna bounce that comp off you, and I said, like I wanted your notes, and it was just sitting in there, and I was like, oh, all right, well, there we go. Stephen beat me to the punch. Yeah, I think there is a bit of that. So yeah, I first off totally agree with you on the body. Like, this is not a guy. And by the way, if you're listening live and you're in the chat, if you have questions about any of these guys or you disagree with anything, let us know. We'll address it, answer any questions you guys have in the chat.
Sure.
So just throwing that out there as well. Now that we are live, and by the way, if you're listening to this on the podcast feed, we're going to be live every week now. So come in 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern. I led with Central because in Central, we never get to leave off. I lead off.
There you go.
I'm tired of the disrespect. We're putting the Central time first.
You don't have to convince me I'm from Arkansas. I grew up in the Central. So
yeah,
you're fine with me, man.
So yeah, Ron Holland is not a guy that I watch and I think, oh, I'm worried about this portion of his game from an athletic or body standpoint. He's 6'8", already 200 pounds, but a good frame that's going to fill out. Not someone that you watch and you're like, oh, is he going to be able to slide his feet well enough? Is he quick enough? Does he jump well enough? Like, none of those questions really exist within his game. On the defensive end, like you said, he can make plays off the ball because he is so quick and he is long. Especially in the high school film, his motor really stood out. Like, he was a guy where, like you said, transition starter, but just a guy who can really exert his will on a game and make his presence felt all the time. The thing that I thought was most interesting with him is he was a guy where there were some questions about the jump shot. And so far, he's shooting well. Like, so far, he's shooting around 35-36% from three, but he's really hunting the shot. He's aggressive with it. He's taking some step backs. The confidence is there. The results look good. And he's at like 80, 85, 88, something like that from the free throw line too. So all the indicators as far as the shot go are great. So if you're looking at a guy who's 6'8" and can defend and can make shots, like, awesome starting point. This is a really good place to start off. And I think a lot of times it's a conversation that Nathan Grubel and I have had a lot. And I'm going to bring this up again later. A lot of times in the draft space, because we are so deep in the weeds and we're watching so much film, we can get really nitpicky with guys. Yes. But I think it's really important to not lose sight of the big things. Ron Holland is doing very well at the big picture things. Like this is a really good starting point, athletically, defensive playmaking, shot making. Where I think he can run into trouble is, like you said, if you're projecting him to be a number one guy, I kind of like the passing. I think there are moments where he is slinging on the go, going downhill. It shows up mostly in transition, but occasionally it'll pop its head up in the half court. I don't think there is a balance to his creation right now. It feels like he's really premeditating. And there's times where you can tell, like, oh, I'm going downhill and I'm going to pass it this time. Or there's times where it's like, I'm getting my shot off here and the shot isn't there. And it's early in the shot clock and he is forcing a bad look. And that can be really frustrating. And even at a younger age, that's something that guys who end up being number one options kind of have a little bit more figured out than Ron Holland is. There's not that fluidity, reading the floor, processing part of his game yet. I think it can get there. And I think if it does, then you're talking about somebody who could potentially be a second option on a team as long as the shooting keeps coming along. But as of now, that's where you kind of get into that like Wiggins territory where like the handle can be kind of shaky. He can get bumped off his spots. He'll settle for some just tough twos. You're like, oh no, I don't like that. That's the kind of stuff that has to change. especially like the handle. Like the handle is something that I think in like some of the craft of this footwork, it shows up mostly in transition. So it's like encouraging. Like that is
Sure.
potentially something he can figure out. But very rarely am I like, oh man, he really put that guy on skates and beat him with his craft in the half court. And then the other thing is his effort at the point of attack has been kind of disappointing to me on defense.
Yeah, I see that too.
In the Intercontinental Cup game, it was one against, I was just using the abbreviations on the bottom of the screen, FCA. They played in a FIBA tournament against other pro teams from other countries. And these are like not great pro teams. Like he's not playing against Real Madrid or
Sure.
Barcelona or one of these teams. He had a couple bad plays where he just got beat straight up off the dribble and then did the whole like you would see like a take foul in transition where it's just like, oh, I'm just gonna like kind of wrap my arm around the guy and foul him. And then like it led to an and one because there's a continuation rule in professional basketball. And like those kind of plays, like you cannot be doing that, man. Like if you're not going to be the leading option type player, and I guess technically he is on this team, but even that you could argue, he can't be making those kind of mistakes on defense. Like he's going to really have to guard the ball, and sometimes that comes up and it's a problem. So I need to see more consistency from him guarding the ball on defense.
Yeah, I can see that too. And I don't really want to, I mean, we're no ceiling, so obviously I'm not gonna put a lid on this guy. I don't watch his game and necessarily think that I even am anticipating wanting to make Ron Holland like a break you down off the dribble guy. I don't think that he's a bad passer by any means. I just don't think that he's going to be like a high volume ball mover or anything like that. And
Yeah.
which is fine. I mean, like you can, and here's the thing, Maxwell, and I think that we'll get into these conversations a little bit more as the season progresses and we start seeing like the full crop of prospects play. If you're drafting, say, an Andrew Wiggins in this year's draft class, or even like say a Jeremy Grant, someone that's going to be more considered to be a play finisher, right? Like you're still going to draft that guy pretty darn high, even if like we look at a Justin Edwards as like, one of the more perimeter, like heliocentric type guys, you still would take an Andrew Wiggins pretty high in this class, which I think
For
is
sure.
a fair thing to say when we're talking about when we're measuring guys based off of already proven NBA talent. But I agree with you on the defense, a little bit on the point of attack. I also kind of wonder like what the defensive kind of mantra or philosophy is for the Ignite, because there's also some not very good defenders on this roster as well. And again, Holland is kind of shouldering the scoring load for this team, especially in those international cup plays too, right? So it's kind of one of those things where I'm not going to beat him up. And I'll ask you this too, Maxwell. Like some people have the philosophy like defensive translation up isn't necessarily about production as it is tools sometimes. And I think that Holland does have the tools and a little bit of the production too, which doesn't hurt either.
Yeah, I would agree with that because I think we see that way too often, right? Where like someone will have a good frame and people will be like, "Oh yeah, he could be like a great defender," and it's like,
Yeah.
the great defenders are usually great pretty early on. So
Yeah.
it's part instinctual, and I will say like that aspect of it is encouraging to me that it isn't like a tools problem and that it is sort of technique and things that can get coached out and that the instincts aren't bad. Like just based on my conversations with people working in basketball, they always say like
Sure.
it is so much more preferable to have the issue be like effort and things that can be coached through rather than like this guy has no idea what's going on out there or this guy isn't physically capable of guarding the guys that play in this league. So
Yeah, it
it
doesn't
could
have
be
the
worse.
JJ Redick negative wingspan that he talks about on his podcast all the
Right.
time.
Yeah. So Holland, I think, is a very interesting player. Um, feels pretty safe, feels pretty high floor.
Yep.
Really, really excited to see kind of how he progresses. Because if the playmaking balance comes along, then he can really be and stay in that number one mix. Let's move on to Modest Buzelis. So with Buzelis, he did not play in the Intercontinental Cup games. I believe it was an ankle injury. He is 6'11". I believe ESPN has him third right now. At one point, he was the number one player on their, I believe their initial mock draft that they did back in like June. 6'11", very tall, very thin. Kind of came into the year with a reputation as this kind of big initiator, jumbo initiator, playmaker.
He do turbo. Yeah.
Yes, I think that is, and that's like one of the questions I had in here is like, is he Haydu?
Yeah.
He is big, smart, and he has high feel. Another guy who defensively, like, there are concerns, and part of it is his frame. He's a little easy to drive through. His feet aren't the quickest. He had a couple missed rotations in the Perth games, but I do ultimately think he kind of knows what he's doing, and he knows how to use the fact that he's a gigantic man really well. And when he switch, he like knows when to switch is a big thing.
Yeah.
Like he understands the scheme. He understands what's being asked of him when a ball screen is set, whether he's the person guarding the ball or he's guarding the screener. He gets up really easy too. Like he gets blocks just very easy off his feet, not a big time load leaper, and he can make good rotations. Offensively, I think his biggest thing right now, in terms of like this is a skill that he has that he can utilize in an NBA game, is shooting off the catch. He was something like a 43% corner 3-point shooter in high school. If his feet are set, he's a really good shooter. With that, he has some ups, and because he understands the game, there's some really nice starting point off ball roll stuff. He has feel, he can shoot, he can cut, and he's a quick decision maker. So like the offensive skill set, very intriguing and easy to see in kind of a lower usage capacity. You can spot him up, he can shoot, he can attack the basket, he can cut off the ball. If he gets the ball, he can swing it quickly. He's not going to catch it, stop and survey. It's going to be a 0.5. He knows what he's doing out there. I think where we run into trouble is the physicality and how much it can catch up with things. So right now, he is very awkward against contact. And this was an issue in high school too. Like if you watch the Sunrise tape, if you bump him, he kind of just has to pick up his dribble. Like the play is just sort of over if you can make any sort of contact against him. And with that being the case, then it really calls into question, like, what good is a lot of the playmaking? Like, how much does it matter if he can dribble well for his size or can make these reads if it's going to be hard for him to get downhill because you can just kind of throw your body on him and then it's done. He's got to regroup, got to gather, got to pick the ball up. It's concerning to me, particularly because he's not a great movement shooter. Like he's not a guy who can run around and get open like a Jordan Hawkins or a JJ Redick, like somebody said earlier. He's more of a standstill guy. So in the touch through contact kind of falters too. In the second Perth game, there were 2 plays where he just had bad misses against contact early on at the basket. So if the finishing against contact is an issue, if the creation against contact is an issue, and he's not a movement shooter, I think the offense can be a little dicier than it might appear. But at the end of the day, he's 6'11" and can really shoot, and he is smart. And I do think he's going to find a way to make things work. But I do think from a physicality standpoint, he will get stronger. But I think relative to his opposition, he's always going to be on the weaker side for an NBA player. And if that's the case, I'm not sure how high his ceiling is. And then there's questions about like, well, then who does he guard? It's a murkier fit for me. And it's why I have him more in like the 10 range than the top 3. And I know that's a little controversial. It's becoming less controversial, but that's kind of where I settled on him before the start of the year. And I'm feeling pretty affirmed in that.
Yeah, same. I have them even a little lower. I have them 12, right? And I know that this early on in the season that they can seem like hate, but much like you, Maxwell, I was concerned with a lot of things, but I'll start positive. He has very intriguing ball skills, and whether or not he is that 6'10", 6'11", he might be closer to that 6'8", 6'9". He's still very big for an initiator, right? Which is what I think the best version of Matas is going to be, like a jumbo creator, right? He's a solid athlete. I would even put that, like, I would probably say in terms of tiers of athleticism, you have sneaky and then you have solid. So although he is, a little bit on the pale side, he is still he's a good athlete, right? He's not, your traditional sneaky athlete. Stronger, I think, than what you would expect too, which is weird because although offensively he can kind of get bumped off his spot, I think he plays a little bit stronger defensively, which probably if I had to pick one or the other with his skill set, I would prefer him to be a little bit more stout defensively than offensively. He has a very pretty shooting stroke. I do think though he plays kind of upright. You notice that he's kind of
Yes.
stiff,
Yeah.
and that is really a big issue for me because if you're a high feel guy, you would like to be a little bit more fluid, and he just feels very kind of robotic and very angular in the way that he plays. Finishing with touch and traffic needs improvement. No reason to think that it won't. He can still get over the top of people unless it's
Yep.
Alex Sarr, where he's getting double rejected on the same play, right? I think that that's going to be the negative highlight reel for people who want to kind of knock Matas. You're going to see that play pop up a lot. He's again for a creator though, and plays very upright. He's a straight line driver. He doesn't have a lot of wiggle to his game, which I think kind of hurts the ball handling prospects for him at the next level. He also, Maxwell, I don't know if you noticed this too, but he uses his offhand a lot
A ton.
He's like he's playing football almost. And
yeah, we used to joke there was a kid that I played with in grade school who would always do that. And we'd always joke it was like he was karate chopping the opponents like constantly. 'Cause the kid like also did karate and we're like, yeah, he's really putting that to use on the court. Like it's a lot of using that to get separation. And that's another concern where it's like the reason you're doing that is because you're not really able to separate.
yeah, and even though that he's going to be like one of these creators, he's a little bit more careless with the ball than I would like to think. The shot grouping, like the spread of his misses, I think kind of surprised me on the rewatch of the Perth films because even though he's like labeled as a good spot up shooter, he has some, like you mentioned, some very ugly misses. So again, some more redeeming qualities about his game. I do think that again, more strong than he appears. He's not afraid to mix it up on the glass or do some like kind of off ball activity either. And he, again, to speak negatively though, on the defensive end, he gives a lot of space to the ball handler whenever he plays defense. I think that he kind of prefers to have his man kind of attack him as opposed to like defend an open space, which again is kind of an issue for me. And I worry about him being too high on the pecking order for a team, right? So again, kind of similar to Ron Holland, right? You're not drafting Matas Buzelis to be your number one guy. So if you're looking at him and you're drafting him and he's going to be kind of more your like tertiary, maybe fourth highest, in terms of priority on an offense or defensive end, are you really getting the best version of him? And so
Do we
if
have
you're
him too high then?
I think we might.
Like
And
that's like I don't like, and I'm not I don't want this to be like a let's dump on Modest thing because like it legitimately could just be like he's going to get stronger throughout this year, and then all of a sudden he's like a legit second side playmaker who's 6'11" and can shoot the ball. And like if he's that, then it's hard to like put him out at the top 8 even. But I just worry a lot about how much his playmaking can scale up given the lack of burst and issues with physicality.
And here's the thing, Maxwell, like you said, it's early. We're friendly, no ceilings. We root for all these prospects, even the ones that we have our suspicions on. So I think that our analysis and placement of him is more than fair. You know what I mean? And I think we're still giving him kind of credence to the reputation that he established for himself coming in to the year, right? So we're tipping our hat a little bit to that, but we're also kind of pulling back the reins a little bit and saying we're not getting carried away with our placement of this guy because there are a lot of real concerns. And again, with a class that's wide open, I don't feel like I have to have this guy top 5 prospect just because, the high school scouting report said that we had to, and so kind of playing the field a little bit both ways here because it is still really early.
Yeah. And I do think he is a good enough shooter that like, I think the downside isn't so severe with him because of the feel and the shot and size. Like it does insulate him a lot more. Like I don't think this is a guy where the floor is going to totally fall out if he doesn't reach, his optimum outcome in the NBA or anything like that.
Would you be surprised if we saw him for another year? If we want to peel the onion back on this a lot?
Oh man, I would be surprised because he like if I'm an NBA team and I'm picking like even if he has if he looks like this all year, it's still kind of hard to pass on a guy like that and be like, well, what if I put them in my G League system for a year and like they don't have to worry about 7 other guys. We're just focused on like maximizing Buzelis. Like I think that could work out pretty well for a team.
Well, here we go. It's the beginning of October. I'm already questioning
Yeah.
those
I think it's an interesting
hypothetical.
hypothetical to be like disaster
Sure.
scenario. It's this, but I do think at the same time, then we need to look at like what is the most optimistic outcome, and I do think it is the second side creation stuff really popping. And if it does, and like this is a draft where we're not sure that there is a guy that's a number one option, then like what better than a second side guy that's 6'11" and can shoot the three. So I think that's a real possibility too. I do think that outcome could still be on the table for him too.
Fair enough.
Let's get to Izan Almanza. Almanza is very interesting. Very, very interesting.
I'm sorry. Let's just get this out of the way now. Is it Izan or Ethan? Ethan Almanza? Because the way I'm hearing
it's technically Ethan Almanza, right?
Okay. I want to make sure. I mean, we got all season to mess up these kind of foreign prospects' names.
I need to get over the habit I have of watching games on mute, because I like to do that just because I don't want like to be pushed into something by commentary or whatever. So I need to change that, especially with names at the beginning of the year. Almanza is very interesting because he's very big and has a very high level of field. Hyper intelligent passer, sees openings really quickly, and has the creativity to like find the most the most optimum and efficient way to get the ball to his man. Just very, very quick thinker out on the court. Can run handoffs, pass out of the post, or keep it swinging. In the game against FCA, he had a handoff keeper where this had been a question about his game, as he was kind of this high skill big man, really cleaned up in like U19s, U18s, every international competition. He's been like MVP all tournament, whatever. But there were some questions because he's 6'10" and he's not a great athlete, and he hadn't been much of an outside shooter. He'll take, one every couple games. Against FCA in the Intercontinental Cup, took a handoff keeper three where it's like, oh, handoff isn't here. I'm launching. Like, it wasn't like, oh, well, the guy didn't take it and I'm open. All right, I guess I'll shoot this one. It was confident. And then a few plays later, John Jenkins hit him in the corner and he just launched that thing. Not a bit of pause in him. So that outside shot is coming along, which I think is necessary, but also super encouraging, because high skill bigs, if they have that outside shot, it just opens up so much more for them and what they can do orchestrating from the top of the key and from the elbow and the nail. He has the ability to bully smaller guys and finish with touch. He's 216, so he's got some weight he needs to put on, but he's not like rail thin or anything like that either. Touch is really nice in the post, and he knows how to play off the ball too. I thought his timing for when he would dive to the rim when he didn't have the ball was quite nice. Defensively, he had some pretty solid slide and stay big moments. He's one of those guys where the steal numbers are always a little bit better than his peers, just because of that feel and knowing how the opposing offense is going to flow and run, what the next pass is going to be.
He's huge.
He's big. Yeah. My question with him is the defense and what he's going to look like within the speed of an NBA game. Because his motor is not high all the time, and that can lead to some issues. In one of the Intercontinental Cup games, I was very, very frustrated watching him because A, he doesn't really have a second jump, but B, like, he can really stand and watch on the glass. So there would be plays where like a big man takes a hook shot over him and he jumps and he doesn't get it, but he's completely upright and he's just watching the ball on the glass, and then the guy gets it and they can put it right back up because he doesn't have the ability to just pop right back up off the floor for that second contest. He can stand and watch, rough second jump, and then subpar recovery tools too. So like if you get him off his feet, or if you do get past him, like at the NBA level, he's gonna have a really hard time in those situations. I think because of the size and feel and the fact that he's not like a horrific athlete. Like, we're not talking about like, I'm trying to think of guys in like recent years.
36-year-old Zadronis Ilgauskas.
Yeah. Or like like he's not that bad of an athlete, but he's not a great one either. And I think the floor for how good you have to be on offense to get away with being like a lesser defensive center in the NBA can be really high. Like, you need to be so good offensively to compensate for that. I think he's capable of it. But I do worry a little bit about like, our team's going to be able to pick on him, and is this going to be a pattern? Like, he had to do so much travel. Like, they've had a lot going on with Ignite. So I'm hoping that that's part of why he might have looked a little bit sluggish at times in these games. But I really need the defensive motor to be very high, given where his physical tools are. And I was a little frustrated by that element of his game. But where are you at with Almanza? And what do you like if you want to kind of answer to that kind of initially off the top? Like, how concerned are you with the defense?
Yeah, let's go there because I think my notes before that game spoke glowingly of his motor because I
Mhm.
think
Yeah.
leading up to that game it was. And so I don't know, Maxwell. It's something I want to keep my eye on because, like I said, prior to that game, he was just like nonstop, right? So, and then you try to like factor in the human element of it, where the G League Ignite is already extremely well traveled in their very young early season, right? So, this guy is going from playing the OTE, where a lot of things are kind of like centralized for him. You
Mhm.
know, like OTE did travel, but it was more centralized. The G League is going all over the place right now. And then we know that their schedule is going to be one of the longer ones relative to a lot of these other leagues, right? So I don't know if that was like strategic in a sense. Do you know what I mean? Like if
Mhm.
just that one game and right now one game is a higher volume of our overall viewing experience of these guys, right? Like that just makes sense. So I don't know if I'm ready to say that his motor is inconsistent or if it was like just strategic because right now, like Matas Buzelis isn't playing in every game right now. So I don't know if there's a lot of strategy that could be going on in there. But overall, for Almanza, I came into the season and Maxwell, I know that you ranked him really high, like
Yeah, I think I had him like 5 or
especially
5 coming
relative
into the year.
to, yeah. And so again, this is one of those classes where we're going to make a lot of money. Um, just kind of like off of our own backs a little bit, you know, like scouting and doing the work because we want to, not because other people are telling us where these guys should be ranked coming into the year, right? So I had on Monza kind of like in the late teens, like early 20s. And so you and I were watching the same guy, but we see different things. I think right now he's probably like somewhere in the middle of where you and I both ranked him. If I
Mhm.
had to do a mock draft today. So I think that a lot of the things that you said hold very true for how I'm looking at him. Like he is a very high feel, but under the basket big. So then the question is like, can you at least be Alperen Şengün, who just so happens to be one of the best passing big men that the league has seen? Like he has a lot of questions athletically, defensively, which again translate to what we're seeing with Almanza. But his feel allows him to be able to see the floor. I don't know if Almanza is that right now. So then the question is, can you be like a really hard nosed screen setter, rebounder, DHO option? And I think that that is available to him. And I think that there is a role in the NBA for that. And I started seeing like comparisons from very well respected people within the draft community, like Rafael Barlow, even our own Corey Tolaba, like said that there's some Joakim Noah in his game, which I
Mhm.
don't think that you get that comp if you don't have high motor. But I think we kind of underrate like Joakim's ability a little bit defensively and as a playmaker.
So good. Like, was the defensive player of the year candidate, and like at his peak was like I think 5th in MVP voting one season. Like, it's a very very high level comp to get.
Exactly. So I see that and I understand where people are going with it. To me, I'm looking at Ethan Almas. I'm like, okay, could you be Anderson Varejao, like bar for bar Anderson Varejao, which is still a very valuable NBA player. And I think that if he came into this draft, he would probably be like a tail end of the lottery pick, like maybe late teens even. And that's kind of like where I'm viewing Ethan Almanza a little bit. So looking at my notes, we already spoke to a lot of the same things. Like you and I are watching the same guy. It's just like, how do we peg his skill set
Mhm.
relative to other players who have done it? And even like the needs of the NBA. Is this a skill set that NBA teams are going to value?
For sure. I think those are all really good questions. We're going to take a quick break. During that break, I'm actually gonna ask Stephen to resend me the format sheet because I somehow lost it and I can't pull it back up. So I'm gonna ask him to do that. But yeah, we are gonna take a quick
Okay.
break here. We're gonna be right back. Coming up on the other end, we've got Tyler Smith coming up and plenty of other players. So stay tuned. Lots of exciting guys here on the other side of the break. Awesome. All right. So we are going to do Tyler Smith up next. Tyler Smith is a guy that I'm really, really into. So he was a guy that we did that initial stream of the Perth Ignite game. And on that stream, I admitted I had Tyler Smith top 20 coming into the season. So he is 6'10", and my goodness, does he have a pro body? Like, he was already a guy that like wasn't going to be deficient in terms of athleticism or size or anything like that. But he came in just like hulking and big, talking about how he's been studying a lot of Chris Bosch film and things like that. So he looked great physically. The jump shot looks great. And I think he has one of my favorite qualities in a role player, which is that when he is open, he shoots the ball. There's no hesitation. If he gets an open look, he is taking it. And he looks deadly from the corners so far. He is fantastic on those corner 3-point shots at this point in the year. Hit some at the top of the keys, hit some in the mid-range. Shows really good hands, like had like a one-handed catch on a lob, cutting to the basket for an alley-oop. Defensively, he can really make plays. Another guy who, when he sits down in his stance, can really contain players at 6'10", can slide his feet, can move with them, and then also offer occasional weak side rim protection, can contest shots really well on the perimeter, gets up well. I think with Tyler Smith, the floor is going to be high because anytime that you are 6'10", you're able to guard the ball and you're able to make open shots, there's going to be some sort of place for you in the NBA. I think where it gets like into question, I guess, would be how much can he put together as far as the connective elements of his game. So right now, he's not with much of a handle. He doesn't have much of a counter game. Everything is very like it's a straight line drive or I shoot it. He had some nice moments in one of the Intercontinental Cup games, like going downhill and like making a kick to the strong side corner when the defender came to help over, which is like, that's great. Like that is a great, just basic, simple pass to make for a young player. But there's just not a ton of like extra sauce to him. And then defensively, has some moments where he can get a little bit lost rotationally. I think my biggest gripe with him, and again, it's one of those like easily fixable things, is he gets kind of heavy on his feet. So if there's a screen situation where he needs to switch, he's really kind of sitting back a little bit too far, and guys can get past him that shouldn't be able to. They tried him at the 5 a little bit in one of those intercontinental games. Had some defensive issues with it, like just isn't quite used to like being the low man at the basket. And then I thought on offense, like it was a real kind of Ricky Bobby, like what do I do with my hands? Like where he was standing, like he was like kind of in the dunker spot. And he made one nice pass out of the dunker spot, but he wasn't like quite sure where to be on the baseline and things like that. But I like that they're trying that out. I think that could be a very interesting placement for him given his size and his body. But I love just the rough framework. It's like we talked about earlier. Like the rough framework is a guy who's 6'10", has a ton of confidence in his shot, can drive in a straight line, has good soft hands if you're rim running him, and can guard the ball. The technique things on defense, I think, are pretty small. I think the awareness and kind of instincts and things like that are not so deficient that I think it's at a place where he's going to get up to speed throughout the course of the year. I'm really enamored with Tyler Smith. Are you kind of in a similar place, or are you somebody who's still more hung up by like, I'm just missing a lot of connective tissue and I'm not super comfortable jumping the gun with him?
I think I'm in the latter of that right now, which I don't think that I don't think that he's limited in his development by any means. It's just that when I'm considering everybody else who's in this class, uh, I have more questions on him than I do a lot of other players, right? And I'll start with, again, very strong, powerful athlete. Looks like his jumper has improved between last season and this season, which is already like potentially a great sign that he, given off seasons to improve, that he's going to be able to do that, right? Very good rebounder on both sides of the ball. Not too polished around the basket, but it looks like there's a pathway to get there. He doesn't seem timid in there, and he's looked like he's willing to experiment a little bit just to kind of see what works in gameplay, which is kind of like the whole purpose of the G League Ignite program, right? Like we're trying to figure out what these guys can and can't do. Very good lob threat, a nightmare in transition. I would not want to stand in front of this man in a full sprint. No, thank you at all. Doesn't seem to shrink in lineups when there's like kind of big names on the team or like even bigger players than him. Like he's kind of up for the challenge. And that's the type of attitude and mentality that you want to see in a guy like that. Very active on defense. doesn't seem lost on switches at all. And I think that that's the big thing too. When I'm looking at him and like the versatility that he brings, I think right now you would probably be confident in the fact that he can guard like the 2 through the 4, like when
Mhm.
he's at his absolute best. And I think that there's a pathway. Maybe he can even do like 2 through 5, depending on the matchup, right? When
Yeah,
serving,
yeah, I think so. Yeah, if another team goes small, like I think I love the G League experimenting that. And one thing that you hit on too that I thought was like so spot on is like him not shrinking. I thought in those Intercontinental Cup games, like there was one game where they were just down bad early and they subbed him in and he had so much fire. Like it felt like he
yep.
was the guy on the floor who most wanted to get them back in that game. Like he has just a tremendous motor and a real competitive fire to him. And I
Hmm.
really value that kind of stuff. Like they're just not guys that like again, like positional strength and like having that dog in you, or to just totally underrated playoff skills when you have
Yep.
the other stuff. And Tyler Smith does with the size and the shooting. So, all right, continue on. Sorry, I thought that was a great point that you made.
No, I appreciate you patting me on the back there. It feels nice. I just I got a couple things that I want to bring up and then a question I'll pose to you because I
Mhm.
feel like it's in keeping with how we've been breaking down these players.
Yeah,
When serving as a weak side rim protector, I'm worried right now that he's a little bit too easily manipulated. I think in the more
that's fair. Yeah.
sophisticated offensive sets that he is going to get lost, but I think if it's ball dominant pick and roll switch, I think that he's good on that. But if there's a lot of off ball motion activity and the big man is kind of pulled away and he's got to kind of play rover a little bit, I think that he's a little too easily manipulated now. I want to ask you, Maxwell, do you think, I don't think, and by all accounts, anything that I've heard, he seems like he's a really great worker and like not
Mhm.
someone who's going to react negatively to great coaching
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
advice,
Yeah.
obviously, right? I could see him having like a long-term trajectory to being a very, very good NBA player, which is why I kind of debate where I place him on my board. Because right now he's very toolsy and raw. But so was a guy like Jeremy Grant. So was a guy like Paul Millsap, who
Mhm.
came into the league as an undersized rebounder. Like that was his NBA ready skill. But then by the time he gets to Atlanta, he's like breaking people down off the bounce, like dribbling, passing, a very switchable defender and still a really good rebounder. And kind of the same story for Jeremy Grant, like very good athlete, um, defensive minded guy. But then he started growing as a shooter. And then he's like, okay, can I take people off the bounce? Can I create for myself a little bit and still be
Mhm.
a very good defender? I see players like that and I wonder like how do we evaluate those guys retroactively? What skill sets do they have? Like what mindset and mentality do they have? And does Tyler Smith have a little bit of that in him?
Yeah, I think that's tricky because I also think like it's hard to like just come up with names off the top of your head, but like it also feels like kind of an archetype that's easy to get suckered into, right? Where it's like there's tools and there's like a skill, but then like also a lot
Hmm.
of it is kind of a mess. And it's like, okay, well, what if he ends up what if he's Isaiah Todd, for example? You know what
Hmm.
I mean? Like there, like that's also a possibility where it's like, oh, like he's big and like he's a good
Tyrus
shooter
Thomas, yeah.
for his age at his size, and then like it just doesn't happen for whatever reason. I think that's like my concern, and like he has been like a pretty poor free throw shooter. He was like 55% in those Intercontinental
Yeah.
Cup games, which again, like it's a 3 game sample. It's 11 free throws. He was also 33% from three. Um, I think it's totally fair. I am optimistic with him. I love the Chris Bosh thing. I love that when they ask like who do you model
Yeah.
your game after, he's like a guy who is an excellent third wheel. Like I think he knows I'm never gonna be the guy, but like I could be really awesome at being a complimentary piece. I think your concerns with the defense are like where it gets shakier because if he was
Hmm.
somebody that was a little bit more consistent in those little thing areas, it feels like you can almost play him right away if he had
Yeah.
that stuff. And anytime you're not playing right away in the NBA, it can become dicey. Like teams, we see how quickly they move on from some of these guys
Hmm.
that go in the second round. And a lot of places have Tyler Smith mocked in the second round right now. So like if that is a thing that happens to him and a team is either in a win now situation or hey, maybe your star player, wants a favor for a guy that's with the same agency as him. You could be on the chopping block. Like it's very finicky, or you could be throwing in a trick. You never know.
Or if you're
Um,
on a team that is drafting, three other prospects in the second round and there's an injury to
yep.
another position and they're called up and you're not, like it could be something as simple, minute, and like something we don't even think about, something like that.
Yeah. So I think with Tyler Smith, he's going to be a lot. I feel like we're going to say this about a lot of these guys coming up. A lot of these guys, it's going to be kind of like Leonard Miller last year, where it's going to be like, what's the point A to the point B? Like, how much does this stuff kind of even itself out and round itself out? Because Leonard Miller had some similar issues last year. It was just like, oh, rotationally, he's kind of a mess. Like he makes some really bad mistakes. And then by the end of the year, like the turnovers were coming down. Defensively, he was a lot more keyed in. Like and the motor never wavered with him too. Like he was the guy, and Scoot gets a lot of, credit for being a really competitive guy. But last year, it felt like Leonard Miller was probably the most competitive player on that team. And that's kind of the feeling I'm getting from Tyler Smith so far. So I do think that part of it is like, I don't really feel comfortable answering it right now, but I think it's a very valid kind of concern to have.
Okay.
Let's do London Johnson next. So I'm a little bit lower on London Johnson. He's a 6'3" guard, second year in the program. So I'm going to have you lead with London Johnson because I'm kind of operating under the assumption that you probably like him a bit more than I do.
Yeah, I do. I like him a fair bit, Maxwell, and I get the reservations that people have with him, and a lot of the reservations that people have with London Johnson are a lot of the ones that I share with some of the collegiate prospects that we're going to be talking about within the coming weeks and writing about over at NoCeilingsNBA.com. You should check it out; it's 100% free if you want to. But he's 6'3". He has filled out a lot more this year than what he did last year. He looks like put on some very good functional weight, right? The thing that motivates me to place him higher than some of these other college prospects is that he showed flashes last year in a pro league, and this year he's like captaining a pro league and is organizing a lot of this other great talent, right? So while that might not scream draftable prospect, if you can come into the NBA and play off of other stars as like one of these like undersized guards, that has immense value to some degree. Right. I have him in my top 60, but it's more on the fringe side. I would, if I have a second round pick and multiple of them, there's no reason why I would not consider taking London Johnson because he's got a very mature game, or mature, if I'm going to quote, Pat McAfee. Very mature game. He's orchestrating and organizing this offense with a lot of guys who are going to be, highly ranked prospects and probably get a little bit more developmental time than he will. Very confident in his handle. He handles contact pretty decently and has good craft around the basket. You can see where he was teammates with Scoot last year because he does kind of like to get to that mid-range game and hit that pull-up midi, which is cool to see how like even the young mentorship of Scoop Henderson kind of rubbed off on a guy like London Johnson. Very smooth movement patterns, is very comfortable and confident to get to his spots. He's not super powerful, but very capable to snake his way into some very tight windows. But he has a very vanilla game. Like nothing pops, but nothing's bad either. It's kind of like Andre Miller in the sense to where it's just like he's just going to go out there and get the job done, and there's something to be said about that. I think that he can be confident in his prodding and ability to get to the rim sometimes kind of to a fault, meaning that he can get into turnovers. You know what I mean? Like he can create turnovers a little bit more easily, or turnovers can happen more frequently than I think that I would like to see. Has sound vision, can make good passes. He makes above average looks, but nothing that's going to be like, oh my goodness, did you see what London Johnson just did? Since he's a 6'3" guard with second tier athleticism with average shooting, he's going to have a ceiling that other players won't have to break through. And that's ultimately where I land with him, where he's like a very sound prospect, but no one that I'm going to just like gush about other than just like the maturity and his ability to just like be a grown up out on the floor at a very young age, which is still pretty valuable for NBA teams.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to kind of lead off with just my kind of overarching concern. And a lot of this is like not even specific to him. It's more just like a trend in where basketball is going. We've seen how hard it's gotten for guards. Like it's just really, really hard if you're a guy that's 6'3" and under, because there are so many bigger players that can run an offense now. And if you have a bigger player running the offense, why would I play a guy who's 6'3" in complimentary when I could play a guy that's 6'6" in complimentary? It just doesn't, make sense. Over the summer in the FIBA games, I thought what happened to a guy like Austin Rivers was really interesting, where teams were just like, Austin Rivers isn't small, but we can find ways to size mismatch him in the post.
Yeah.
And like in the FIBA Intercontinental Cup games, that's happening to London Johnson already. And it's like, all right, if some of these like lower tier pro leagues can do this to him, like why wouldn't this happen in the NBA? So I'm just like, I'm at a point with guards right now where it's like, I need you to blow the doors off me. I need to be like completely just jaw dropping. If I'm going to like spend draft capital on you, I think this is the conversation about bigs a couple years ago. And like, if bigs were so easy to get off the scrap heap, like if there were 9 million bigs, the Golden State Warriors wouldn't be like bringing back Dwight Howard right now. Like if it were so easy to go find a big man, like I don't know. I think that's way more true of point guards. And I think we're seeing it with even guys that like aren't a traditional point guard, like a guy like Trevor Keels or like Kennedy Chandler, Sharif Cooper, Ty Washington,
Bingo.
these guys that we've just seen get bounce and bounce and bounce. And
very highly skilled, highly touted players.
Good guys that like a lot of people thought were first round players, and teams are just ready to move on because there are other guys that are older, maybe more mature, a little bit more polished, a little bit more ready for everything that makes up part of being an NBA player that maybe we don't see every day. Like they can just get a 28-year-old guy on a minimum that does a lot of those same things. So if I'm drafting a guy that might never be worth more than a minimum contract, like, is that a good approach from a draft philosophy standpoint? Like, to me, I don't think it is. And that's like why I don't have London Johnson in draftable range, but that's not to say that maybe he can't overcome that. I think what we're seeing with his shooting has been really encouraging so far. Like he's hitting his threes. The volume is low, but at the same time, I don't fault him because he's working really hard to get 2 feet in the paint, and he's doing it a lot. Like this dude plays with a real sense of aggression and assertiveness and toughness. And I like that a lot. This team needs a guy that can reliably do that, especially with, Holland kind of having the playmaking balance issues that he's having, Modest struggling to get inside the paint and create against contact. London Johnson doing what he's doing is unbelievably important for the success of everybody else around him on this squad. The pull-up shooting, like you mentioned, in the mid-range is great. I want to see the percentage from three kind of climb, but the fact that he's this smooth and so skilled in that mid-range area is important. And I think he has NBA speed. I do think he looks fast playing against other pros, and that's really important for a guard. You kind of mentioned like that he can kind of get himself in trouble. I think there seems to be like a lack of spatial awareness at times where like some guys will get into his handle off the ball occasionally. And it's like, you got to know that guy's there. Like you got to be aware of that. But in general, his ball control has been very good in the Intercontinental Cup games. I think
you spoke to that really well too. The spatial awareness is what I'm saying when it's like he can like prod and get his way into the paint, but to a fault to where it creates turnovers. Yeah. And it's just like he can get to his spots with ease, but it's like, what do you do when you get there type stuff with him?
Yeah. So I think that's something that needs to come around. But in general, like the assisted turnover numbers have been tremendous. So I think there's a real path because like we mentioned, like from a physical athleticism standpoint, he's in a better place than a lot of guards. The feel is in a good place. The aggressiveness, the confidence is in a really good place. So I do think there's a chance for him to break through. But just with where I'm at with guards, I'm going to be a little bit lower on him to start the year, and he's going to kind of have to like earn his way up for me. But he's doing the right stuff. Like he's doing the things I want to see, and I just want to see him continue to do it and get better at it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And like I said, we'll talk about this more when we start getting into like our college basketball previews and some of our more like centralized focus writing pieces on NoCeilingsNBA.com, where I'm with you. And again, the separator that I'm giving London compared to a lot of those other guys is that he's doing it in the G League and has shown flashes last year, and he's doing it against really good talent this year.
And I think something that he almost doesn't get enough credit for is like he shot it pretty well in the G League last year for like is he gonna shoot a guy? It's like he's like 34% last year for like a 17-year-old in the pro league. Like, hey, good starting point. So we're gonna take a final break and then we're gonna be back. We're gonna cover Babacar Sane as well as Thierry Darlin, two very interesting prospects, probably the guys that are lowest on boards, but you talk to certain people and people have them really high. So because there's reasons to believe. So we're going to get into those two coming up on the other side of the break. Stay with us. All right, let's get into Babacar Sane. I feel like he's the guy that we were both just really impressed with from a frame standpoint
Yes.
when we first saw him. So I'm going to kind of let you take the lead on him and kind of what you've seen from his game thus far.
Yeah, so there's been some pictures and like even just watching the game, but when you start to get like those neck up like Getty images of him and you look at him, it's just like, oh my goodness, this dude is chiseled out of a rock. He's absolutely ginormous, and he has like such great athleticism already. Uh, I love that when we were watching him play live and we were kind of commenting between everybody at No Ceilings for the G League Perth game. It's just like he has the Jermaine O'Neal starter kit when it comes to like the accessories. You know, he's got the headband, he's got the arm sleeve, the leg sleeves, all that stuff. Like he looks like a 13-year-old got a lot of VC on 2K and went out and just totally decked out as my player or something, right?
Yeah.
But speaking to his game, you know, I love him, and I think that there is such a tremendous pathway for him where if it's not this year, it could definitely be next. And it could be like it could be a this year thing depending on who declares and who stays. And I know we're getting way too far ahead of ourselves, but I honestly think that there is a real pathway for Babacar to be an NBA player in the very near future. Like he makes very timely cuts away from the ball, and that's something that's going to be huge for like a physically imposing forward, right? Who has displayed some decent shooting touch. I think better than what I was expecting coming into the Ignite. The driving is very fun to watch too. He's had a couple of really big games, Maxwell, and it's just he's one of these players I think that is like extremely easy to root for because his wingspan is so long. He has a swag on the court when he's feeling himself. He lets everybody else on the court kind of know it, which is very fun to see. These pre-NBA players be a little bit more confident in themselves. The athleticism really pops me on the defensive side of the ball to where I kind of look at him as like, can this guy be like a Luke Richard and Mute type guy where he's like very switchable, very versatile for grow into a respectable 3-point shooter and is just able to do so much on the floor and just be such a beloved teammate that he is a pro for a long time. And the more I talk about this and think about it, like, do I have this guy too low on my board? I think that he's going to be one of these guys that where I'm like, yeah, I was way too low on the preseason. I don't know why. Maybe it was because it's an international guy coming to the G League or whatever. But I love him. Like, and there's noticeable flaws in his game, Maxwell. I had all the fun. I'll let you be the buzzkill and kind of poke his game apart a little bit. But I love this guy. I think I look past a lot of negatives when I watch him.
I don't know that I'm gonna be the buzzkill. I love this dude.
Okay.
I like I feel like I'm in a similar place with him like that I was with Seth Lundy last year, where it's like there's just a real bias going on that I need to like, all right, reel it in a little bit. And then part of me is like, you know what? No, if you believe a guy, you got to roll with it. I think there's a path for him to get into the first round. He is so big, so strong, and just has that awesome body. Like he's going to be NBA ready from a physicality standpoint from the jump. He's got real deal end-to-end speed too. Like he's not one of those heavy guys like a David Roddy where it's like,
There you
like
go, yeah.
he's big and like this might be a problem at times. Like I don't think it's a problem. I think it's a
you don't hear a
benefit.
tuba in the background when he's running.
Yeah. He goes so hard to the basket.
Yes.
So in those Intercontinental Cup games, he was shooting almost 6 free throws a game, and he's a really good free throw shooter. He's like 82%
He's got
in those
sweet
games.
touch too.
Yes. So he is shooting threes well. He's shooting them with confidence. He's had moments where like guys will kind of like do the thing where they dare him a little bit, where it's like, I'm putting my hand up in your face, but I'm giving you a little bit too much space on the perimeter, and he'll throw the jab step at him, and I'll be like, all right, I'm going to take it. I thought your points on the cutting were good. I think that, yeah, he's really figuring out what to do off the ball. But yeah, like he goes hard to the rim and he plays tough there. So he gets the free throw line to ton, like I said, but he's got kind of a level of touch and finesse against contact.
Like in the mid post.
Yeah, like if he's not going to slam it home, like I still buy that it's going in. Defensively, he's aggressive. He can make some plays. I think the passing is not good. Like, don't get me wrong.
There we go.
Like, this guy is
There's the
not
bad part,
a playmaker. And this is where like the Seth Lundy kind of feeling comes in. And like Lundy's the guy that I'm almost going to watch to see where I feel about Sine. And Sine, he's taller than Lundy and he's younger than Lundy. So like there's benefit of the doubt to give there. And he's going to be playing in a pro league instead of being a senior at Penn State. But he's not like a real toolsy wing who like is going to do a ton of second side stuff. It's going to be very like pass it, shoot it, or drive, not like put it on the floor a little bit, see what you can get, throw a counter in there. Like that's not going to be his game. And defensively, he can make plays, but he can get over aggressive.
Yeah.
There's times where he does bite off more than he can chew from like a self creation standpoint. From a shot taking standpoint, his body control can be a little shaky. He'll barrel into a guy for a charge. He can rush into mistakes. There's some lapses with rotations on defense. When it's bad, it can look pretty damn bad. But this is a guy that like the assist to turnover was like comically bad in like every league he played in prior to this year. And it seems like that's like turned around a little bit. Like again, he's not a guy I want like running stuff, but I think he's competent. And I think he's like figured out like, okay, this is what the speed of the game looks like. And here's how I adapt to it. And here are some things I don't do. It seems like he's really learning. So when you add in like the physical tools, the shooting, the competitiveness, the attacking, the aggressiveness, there's a lot to like. Like there's a lot to like as far as just this is a guy that you can have in your rotation to make shots and get to the rim and make things a little bit more difficult for the other team and body up on some people. I'm liking Sine a lot more than a lot of other people.
So here, two things. One, that's why I kind of like the Lukershaw and Bob Mute comp is like he's not going to do more than what he's good at, and he's really good at the things that he's really good at, which leads me into the question, Maxwell. I think his role in the G League right now is like the perfect role for him in the NBA.
It's idealized, yeah.
How does that scale up though?
That's scary, right? And I think this is going to be the first. I think we could have this conversation about London Johnson too, right? Like,
sure,
with the G League now, where you can play in a professional league and not have to declare. I think with London Johnson, to me, is like the obvious one. Where like so many point guards that stick are guys that have like played 4 years now. Like I wouldn't hate if London Johnson just like keeps playing in the G League and figuring more and more stuff out. I think Sine could be the next guy, and I think if he does stay, the leap could be outrageous. But I do think that's a real question. Like anytime the hit rate of guys that are role players at a lower level that then come in and scale up and play that same role isn't great. Like, because the idealized version of this is almost like Draymond Green wasn't a role player, but like I think people like project like, oh, he's like the ideal role player in the NBA in a sense, where it's like he's going to pass, he's going to rebound, he's going to defend a bunch of positions.
Which is why he was a second round pick.
He doesn't need to take a ton of shots, and he was a second round pick. But you go back and watch Michigan State, and like he was the star, like he was the effing guy on that Michigan State team doing everything for them. It's not often like a guy that's like, oh yeah, he scored like 6 points, averaged 5 rebounds and 5 assists in college, and now he's in the NBA, and he's just a great role player doing those exact same things. You usually have to kind of stand out and be special at a lower level to scale up. And I do think that's another area where I find myself kind of pumping the brakes a little bit, that it's like, okay, yes, he has a physical profile. The indicators are really good, but like maybe it takes a little bit more time, and maybe we do need to see it in a bigger role before we get too excited or put him too high on our boards. I think that's a very good point.
Yeah, and that's the only hesitation that I have with him, and that's why I have in my notes is like, I love him to do the exact same thing in the NBA as he's doing now, but how realistic is it to have the exact same role scale up? And usually whenever it is, it's the more high-end players. It's not the role players that we're asking to come in and just do what you did in college. Like it's rarely ever that simplistic in nature.
Yeah. So let's get to our last player on the board, Thierry. Darlin is a very interesting guy. I've seen some people not have him on their boards at all. I've seen some people put him in the lottery. I thought so. This was interesting to me, and I almost want to like reach out and pick her brain on it. Kristen Peak had a tweet, and this is somebody that's on the ground a lot. Like she does dress coverage for Yahoo. She's everywhere. Like this is not like some guy on Twitter saw him once and said this. Like, she made a comment about him being like the most intriguing prospect on Ignite. And I didn't know if that meant like she thinks he's the best prospect. I'm assuming she meant more like there's a lot of different directions this can go. And this is a very like interesting game that he has. But for someone who has been in the draft evaluation space for a long time, is very respected. And like we said, like she's on the ground a lot.
She
so
is
for
a
her
draft
to say that,
sicko.
like
Yes.
Kristen Peak would not say that he is the most intriguing prospect if she thought he sucked. Like if she thought he was bad, like she probably wouldn't say anything about him. I would guess. I don't know her at all, but that'd be my guess. He is very interesting. He is 6'6". He played in the NBA Basketball Africa League last season, and in 3 games dropped like 23 a game, took a ton of threes and shot 35% on them. Got to the line a bunch, but like not a great free throw shooter. Can do some really interesting playmaking stuff, but at the same time turns the ball over a lot. He has moments where it looks like he can really put the ball on the floor, then other moments where his handle gets really wide and out of control. He's very willing to shoot it off the catch, off the dribble. Defensively plays with a real level of intensity, knows how to use his length well. I am just kind of confused about him.
Me too.
And I'm very wait and see. I like if the draft were tomorrow, I would not hate a team in the second round just being like, let's try it. Because if this kind of guy hits, like you get a total winner. You get a guy with size, playmaking, defensive upside, a real competitiveness. It seems like the motor is there. I need to see just him on the floor against a high level of competition consistently. Like I really don't want to put the cart out of the horse with him. My question is just like, can he find a balance in his game? Because right now it is all aggression all the time. And we say this a lot. Like I would so much rather have that. I would so much rather have a guy who I know is capable of doing a lot of impactful things and saying like, all right, let's do a little bit less of this. Let's do a little bit less of that, than taking the opposite side. Like we were just talking about, where it's here's a guy that can really thrive in a role. And it's like, well, is there any more to him? And what does this look like when you play people that are better? I'm real wait and see with him. Do you have any firm, strong takes at this point, or are you sort of with a similar spot?
Yeah, so Maxwell, I don't know how you are when you watch a player. There's some players where I'm like, we talk about wingspan so much, but I'm looking at Terry and I'm like, dude has some long legs. Like he might have the longest legs in this whole class, like relative to the rest of his body. Like you're saying, man, he loves to attack the rim. He has a few really good moves that where he can get past as an initial defender at a solid clip, not afraid to get in contact and get into the paint. I love that he doesn't feel rushed, more times than not when he is surrounded by people. I think that's like when he's at his most comfortable. And he's had some pretty crazy misses where like it was just like a one-on-one thing. But when he's heavily contested, he's hit some really pretty shots. So kind of like how you were saying, like the consistency on the shot making is kind of wild, right? Like the jumper has some stuff to it. The makes look great. The misses worry me. The shot grouping is very wide and sporadic. I worry about how he looks with other players that are of similar caliber to him, man. Like, and like you're saying, I want to see him on the court with similar minded talent. And like, this is no shot at like Africa basketball leagues or anything like that. But there's a reason why, like, if you're looking comparatively to some of the other professional leagues, why it's not the best level of competition. Like you still get some very talented players, and a lot of them come stateside or go to other leagues before they just will stay in like an African basketball league, So I want to see it with other talent, because I think with the level of talent that he's playing around right now, he looks like a star. You know what I mean? But I wonder, like, is he Tavion Kinsey? You know what I mean? Like coming out of Marshall,
Yeah.
that
Like is
level
he,
of.
I think he's a way more willing shooter than Tavion Kinsey. And like I like Tavion Kinsey, interviewed the guy, like
I
him.
loved him.
Like I think he's really interesting. But like with Kinsey, it was always like, why aren't you shooting? Where with Darlin, it's like, oh, you're gonna do that. Like I don't have questions about if you're gonna do that. And I think that is an upside differentiator, and like why it's like kind of hard to not have him on your board. Like for me, because it's like, if you're willing to do all this stuff, it's just a matter of like, what does it look like against good competition? And like, can you find a level of restraint?
Yeah, I think he's the type of player, Maxwell, where like I'm glad that we don't get our final grades off of our preseason boards. You know
For
what I mean?
sure.
Because
Yeah.
I'm completely okay with rogering up by my 2 or 3.0 and being like, okay, I finally see it. He is
Mhm.
like the epitome of that type of player to me, where like I don't feel like I have to be in a rush to say that I was in on him this early. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like for everybody that is, like, hats off to you for seeing the thing that I can't see, which happens all the time. I'm not
Yeah.
going to sit here and
Mhm.
proclaim that I'm 100% or anything like that, but he is just like the type of player coming from a league that he's coming from, dealing with injury already too, which is another reason to kind of like maybe question some things. But I don't know, man. Like if he proves me wrong in a month or two, I'm happily wrong and I will gladly slot him up my board. I'm just going to be kind of cautiously optimistic right now.
Yep, I think I'm in the exact same space as you on that. Yeah, I'm very production oriented. Like guys that produce are the guys that tend to do well, and he produced at a really high level in those 3 BAL games. But yeah, like the competition level isn't great, and I like there's just a lack of like role clarity too, like what he's gonna do on the court, how well he's gonna do it. It's wait and see for me. I'm
Yeah.
with you. You know, our final our thesis isn't due at this point, and I'm
Yeah.
kind of content to sit and wait on a guy like that. But I think there's real reasons to be optimistic, and I think given his age too, and like the new format, like if this is a guy that I really like the G League bringing in, if there's going to be this multi-year rule in place, because like
Yeah.
if it's rough this year, like it's okay. Like this guy's
Yeah.
got plenty of time to figure it out, and even if it is, like this is the kind of guy that you kind of want to bet on. Like gun to my head, I'm kind of more willing to swing on him than I am on London Johnson, just because of like what the upside is if it goes right. London Johnson's given us a lot more reasons to believe like you could put him in an NBA game tomorrow and he'd be fine.
Hmm.
But I don't know how much more than that he's going to be at like the peak of his powers. And we might look back at this and in a month and London Johnson might be, averaging, 16, 5 and 6. And
Sure.
I look like an idiot, but yeah, I think with Darlin, there's a real upside case, but I don't know what the downside is. And that's kind of what I want to see on the court.
Yeah, and I think that's totally fair. And this is where we can be in wet blanket mode now and be like,
Mm-hmm.
everything is so fit dependent and team
Yep.
dependent too that, you know, we like talking about this stuff all year round, obviously, but like a player like Terry like is a sobering reminder. I think that like especially this early on that like there's so much variability to him, and we haven't even seen him on the court yet. To where I, philosophy plays much more larger of a part at this part of the season. Right now, like I said, I'm not. I don't have to turn in my thesis today, like you said, Maxwell.
Mm-hmm.
I'll turn it in on its due date, and he might be on there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there was something else interesting that you brought up too, with like the team side of it too, and team fit, because teams are so much less patient than we'd like them to be. Like you
Yes.
ran through that whole laundry list earlier of like guys that have been cut like really early on in their career that showed a ton of promise before getting into the league. I'm hoping that the third two-way roster spot like changes that a little bit. But I think something that in the
Potentially
draft space,
expansion.
for sure, yes. I
Yeah.
think something that we can lose sight of in the draft space, and like I kind of got caught up in this last year. There was a lot of guys where I was like, oh yeah, this guy look at a two-way, this guy look at a two-way, and it's like, well, they're also competing with guys that like got a two-way 2 years ago that are like
Hmm.
22, 23 now, and maybe a little bit more ready and closer to giving them what a coach will want on a game-to-game basis, and not what a team building nerd like myself will want and think, well, you got to think long-term and whatever. A lot of teams think a lot more immediately than we tend to
Because their
in
jobs
the
are on the
draft
line.
space. Yes, yeah, they don't have to work. Like I don't have to get. Well, Tyler Rucker did say he might fire me if we don't get enough downloads on this episode, but no, but
Yeah.
like we're not fighting for our
Subscribe,
job.
please. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, please subscribe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think he's kind of an interesting guy in terms of what teams value with him, depending on how the season shakes out, and if he could be a guy where the tools are so good that he still sneaks in to the draft even without a great season. So very interesting player to monitor. So that does it for our Ignite. We've got a big show coming up next week. Do we want to
Yes.
spoil part of it, or do we want to leave people in the dark?
I am okay spoiling a little. Like we'll spoil the idea, but not the guest because
Okay, yeah.
stuff
There's
happens.
Stuff happens. That's true. They're potentially a very cool guest coming on the show. But otherwise, we will be talking about the international class in the 2024 NBA draft. I was looking back through this thing today. We've got to make some adjustments. There are some guys who might take out, guys we got to put back in. So we are going to talk about that tomorrow. But it is a loaded international class. So there is a ton of talent in the NPL, a ton of talent in France, a ton of talent leagues all around the world. And we've got a lot of fun surprises. There are, coming into the year on Mega, everyone was talking about Nikola Duricic, and now there's 2 other guys on that same team that are popping up in mock drafts. So there is a lot going on in the international basketball community, and a ton of fun prospects that we're going to get to cover.
Yeah, and it goes back to the point that we made earlier, Maxwell, to where how much more benefit, like the NBL is kind of new in terms of I would say mainstream popularity. Like they just signed a deal with ESPN to kind of stream these games because the Next Star program is flourishing like crazy. But Eurobasket and things like that, we've seen these leagues have started before college basketball for years and years and years. Now, I think with the draft becoming as popular as it is now, and the importance of making a good first impression is even more important now. It's not even necessarily the first impression, but that you make the first impression, if that makes sense. Like you got to get your name out there before some of these other guys. And that's why we're having to kind of revise our player list. And, again, for next week, Maxwell, we're going to have a guest on too, where, everything works right, that we're going to get to kind of probe a little bit more behind the scenes. And I don't know if this guy has been on very many stateside podcasts, so I'm very excited for the opportunity to have him on.
Yeah, but it is a very loaded international class. And I think, again, like I mentioned when we talked a couple weeks back, I'm always really hesitant about the bad draft narrative. And so far, we've had a bunch of just surprise international players, like a guy like Lockie Ulbrich, where it's just nobody was talking about him a couple weeks ago. And then you see him in the NBL and it's oh, this might be a guy. This could be a guy this year.
Or Huck Purdy, who everyone gave up on last year, who after years of loving the guy, I'm just okay, I guess he's aged out or whatever. And now he's a real name again.
Yeah, there's a ton of players that I don't think we were prepared for. And I think a lot of people in the public spaces weren't prepared for. And that's awesome. It's great. This is why you don't go into the year being oh, the draft stinks. The draft is bad. Boo hoo. I'm not excited about the draft. There's always surprises, and we're getting a ton early. So I'm very excited for that episode next week. But thank you for joining us on this episode. We appreciate it. It's been a blast. Make sure you are subscribed to our podcast feed, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We've got so much YouTube content coming down the pipe this year. And subscribe to Substack, NoCeilingsNBA.com. Steven, do you have written work this week, or are you next week?
Yeah, I actually just had the second part of my Rescoutables thing dropped this past Friday. So for anyone who hasn't got a chance to check it out, please do, because I've gone through the front court and the back court now. But nothing in the works for next week. I really, you're kind of spurring me on. I need to start thinking about those things, because we got all these fun projects going on for No Ceilings NBA that I've kind of given the forefront of my attention, and got some very fun shows lined up for this week too. So I do need to start thinking about some written work. How about you, Maxwell? What you got?
So first off, definitely read the Rescoutables column. Jalen Bridges gets some coverage in there, a guy who I really like a lot. And Jalen Tyson, who is the guy that we were texting about, that just feels like hasn't really gotten the draft buzz, but has a very interesting game and could have a big opportunity at Cal this season. My written work, I'm kind of sitting on it a little bit right now, because it's going to come out. We got 2 columns coming up. 10-9 and 10-16 are the dates on those. We got 2 interviews in the can with high major prospects that are on every draft board. So stay tuned for that. So make sure you are subscribed to NoCeilingsNBA.com for all that. But that does it. Steven, any final words for the sickos out there?
No, just stay sick, guys. This is content for y'all. Hopefully you're liking everything, and continue to stay with us, because I kind of like this doing live business, Maxwell. It's more fun. We're starting to see some people kind of talk underneath us here and having good conversation. And any way that we can facilitate any sort of draft conversation, it makes my sick little heart warm, so I'm glad to see it.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. We'll be back next week, but stay tuned for all the other great shows on the No Slings NBA Network throughout this week. Have a great night. Take care.
Much love, y'all.